Hello, my name is Bill Dixon, here with my co-host, Mr. Bob Matthews, with North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated's Lessons of Vietnam. I want to start out tonight by apologizing. You're going to be stocked with Bob and I's mugs tonight. We did have the retake or the recording of the symposium on POWs and Vietnamese re-education camps. But we had technical difficulties tonight. We have it, but we just can't figure out how to get it shown. So we're going to have to postpone that another week until we figure out how to get from one format to the other. But we have our electronic technician, genius guru, and whatever else you want to call him, working on that little challenge. I'd like to bring in a challenge just about every show just for him, so make sure that he knows that he's appreciated. Bob, this is May's a busy month for Vietnam vets. Everybody seems to be wanting to talk to Vietnam vets or have Vietnam vets talk to them, and it's nice to kind of be popular for a change.
Well, Bill, this has happened every May. It seems like as the school year winds down, that the teachers and the kids have not had all their questions answered. And the phone rings, the emails multiply, and people say, can you come and talk to? So, of course, we never say no. We say, well, how many and where and when? And then we take it to our group. And we are very fortunate in May. In fact, it starts tomorrow. We have our maiden voyage at Green Hope High School. We'll be talking to over 100 students tomorrow, 3 of us, about the Vietnam class and about Vietnam, and the students are looking forward to what we always call first-person history. They've had the books, they've had the movies, but unless they have a personal contact, they haven't had a Vietnam veteran speak to them.
Yeah. Well, you just recently did an interview with one of their students, which kind of got us in. We've been trying to get in that school for some time, but
I have.
The former instructor decided he knew more about Vietnam than those of us who went. But this new instructor seems to be actually interested in getting the real facts. And you met with the student and his father. And
well, what happened, Bill, was I got an email from a young man, a senior at Green Hope, and he said one of his assignments is from the new teacher you mentioned, Mr. Reese, who is a 24-year veteran himself and has been deployed 3 times. So he's a veteran, and he recognizes the value of first-person history. And as he told me on the phone, I can only tell these students about what I did personally. And of course, he's well-read on Vietnam, and he knows all about Vietnam. Well, this young man and I met at McDonald's there by Prestonwood. And Bill, we've done a lot of interviews over the years. This young man was amazing. I mean, when I sit down with him like this, he never took his eyes off me. He started like this with his questions, and he did something that is almost a lost art. Guess what he did? Wrote things down.
Oh, goodness gracious.
He took a pencil like this. He said, do you mind if I have an audio and a recorded interview?
A high school senior actually knew what a pencil and paper was for. Right?
He took out his book, and the questions he asked were the ones that you want the kids to ask. So he said to me afterwards, would you mind coming in, you and maybe a couple of your buddies, to speak to all the kids? So I asked the guys, and they said, certainly. So we go out tomorrow morning. We'll do 2 classes at Green Hope on the 14th, tomorrow's the 14th, and get them going. And they were not even aware of the scholarship program.
No.
They were not aware of a lot of things that have been going on with the NCVVI. And, we said before, and you always emphasize this every time we speak, we cannot assume the kids are well-read. We can't assume they have more knowledge than movies and perhaps word of mouth. We have to fill that void.
Well, Bob, one of the things we've been doing for all these years is basically fighting some of the myths of Vietnam. And so much out there feeds that myth mentality, and us going into classes and trying to straighten out or clarify some of these myths out there and so forth. It's like going back to Tet again. Reason to know, because I was there. We were winning the war, hands down. We were winning the war, and then we won the Tet Offensive. But the news media and the public opinion that was fed by the news media turned it into a total loss. It's amazing how we could be winning something so strong, and all of a sudden, just because a perception of a few people, press and some other people, who were also using it as propaganda against Johnson, we turned around and went from a win in the war and a decisive victory to basically packing up our bag and going home. And that's something that we've always tried to work with the students and explain to them the baby killer concept and the drugs and alcohol and all the myths, and that we're not all crazy, and we want all, people who, I joke all the time, the best 3 years of my life was the fourth grade. And
well, Bill, the questions the students ask are often prompted by teachers, but also you're very good teachers. They will send home assignments, and in today's media age, it's an asset where you have the internet, where you could go on a website and you could actually see what your kids are doing in class. And some parents actually read that. And they say, why don't you ask this question? Well, one kid asked me the question the other day about Jane Fonda, and you knew it came from his dad. And he said to me afterwards, my dad wanted to get your goat. I said, well, you got my goat. Well, then I'll never forget the question I received at Sanderson High School. This is several years ago. What you just said. I'm over there talking to the class. One of the guy in the front, he looked like he was an excellent student because he was writing everything down. He looked like he was a neat freak. And he said to me, well, Mr. Matthews, how do you feel now, years later, being part of the only war we ever lost? Well, when he said that, he paused for my response. Well, I was with two other veterans. Because remember, in the early days, we would take 2 or 3 to speak, like a little panel, bounce off each other a little bit, ideas and so forth. Well, 2 of the veterans looked at me and said, if you agree, we're walking out. I said, there is a door. And one guy walked out and got a drink, came back, and I said, son, do you really think we lost the war? He said, well, Mr. Matthews, I don't want to get in an argument with you, but is not Vietnam now a communist nation? And did we not go there to fight communism, defeat communism? As that was one of our goals in the Cold War, was to combat communism. We called it containment. I said, you're right. Vietnam today is a communist nation. So if you want to split hairs, you can say we did not achieve our objective. But I will not get aboard with you and say we lost the war. I think that needs more comment. How would you have answered that question?
Well, it's like we basically, that joke that they call peace with honor.
Yeah.
We signed a peace agreement basically selling the South Vietnamese country out, and packed up our stuff and came home. We've kind of going back to the Vietnam War. We're somewhat affecting that today. We have the American people have no resolve, and they have a tendency to, we're not the best nation as far as I'm concerned to be an ally of. We have a tendency to sell our allies out and walk away. We, just some of all the comments lately have been about supporting Israel and so forth. It's almost like we're becoming a Muslim nation rather than a Christian nation. If you really look at the history, as I mentioned a while ago, we were winning the war. We won soundly Tet, but the American people's resolve just gave in. I guess we're, as they've always said, we want instant gratification.
Yeah, we're very impatient, very impatient. One thing too about Bill is most people base their opinion on blind statistics. You can make numbers jump any way you want, but if you line up the Vietnam conflict And let's take the years we were there full force. Let's take 65 to 75, that 10-year bracket, that decade. And you laid out on paper battles, engagements, firefights, call them what you like, number killed, POWs, money spent, laying it down against North and South Vietnam. And you come to the conclusion, if you'll read the information, which is another challenge, if you'll read the information, you'll clearly say, we never lost a battle in Vietnam. We came home, and we were winning the war in 72. We pulled out. We had the Paris peace talks, which everybody believed in. And as much as I admired him for years, Mr. Henry Kissinger did not do us a great justice.
He didn't do South Vietnamese great justice, or Walter Cronkite and Peter Arnett and some of these others. Bob, talking about statistics, kind of give an example about statistics. Some time ago, my son-in-law decided he got a job and caused him to travel, and he went to a statistician and said, there's a lot of bombs on the planes and hijackers and so forth. What's the chance on my getting on an airplane with the bomb on it? And the statistician did all of his numbers and came forth and came back to him and said, well, the chances of your getting on an airplane with a bomb on it is 1,000,000 to 1. My son-in-law said, well, that's pretty good odds. What can I do to make those odds even better? Statistician went back and figured his numbers and came back and said, well, if you carry a bomb on the plane with you, your chances of getting on a plane with another bomb are 5,000,000 to 1. So that's kind of how way statistics works.
Numbers dance. You can make numbers dance. But as we talked about before, as people call and say, when you come in and speak to the class, we always say the same intro. This is the format. We're going to tell you about first-person history. Then we're going to take any questions you have. And please don't be afraid to ask any questions, but respect our right to say no comment. Because years ago when I was teaching law and justice in Apex High School, I had cops come in all the time, policemen, men and women all the time. And the question always came up with, how many people have you shot? Well, one guy came in, he said, I'm retiring today. I've been a policeman for 35 years, and I'm proud to say I've never fired my weapon, except at the shooting range to qualify. To me, that was commendable. The kids were disappointed.
Yeah.
We're used to blood and guts.
I wanna go back to that thing, won or lost.
Yes.
Will it be accurate to say that the military won the war and handed it to the politicians, and the politicians screwed it up?
That would probably be in quotation marks and exclamation marks, pretty much the way it was. Like I said, we were winning to get the. There are some people saying that the communists created Tet to get us to the bargaining table. To a certain extent, I think they used Tet to cut back on some of their Viet Cong. The Viet Cong basically were nationalists. And the NVA, which was the regular army in North Vietnam, was communist. And there was some Viet Cong who actually were put in re-education camps after the fall of Saigon because they were still thinking nationalist. We met two former Viet Cong on one of our trips to Vietnam, and he said that he joined the Viet Cong, and after about 30 days, he realized he'd made a mistake because they were communists and he was nationalist.
Right.
So the Tet Offensive was a total loss. I mean, a big loss for North Vietnam. But it was a turning point of the war with American resolve in politics. With the war protesters and the news media and everything, Johnson decided not to run for office. They had beat him up for, yay, how many did you kill today? And all that to Johnson and so forth, and it just got to him. He had a big ego.
He did.
Big ego. And that sort of stuff in the news media, as I had mentioned on the show before, when they were showing Walter Cronkite at Way during the Tet Offensive, he actually had them arranged and staged rocket rounds going off behind him. He was on top of a 4-story building with a helmet on, go and look at these rockets, and it was American Marines shooting the rockets, and it made it look like the Viet Cong were shooting these rockets, and it was really the Americans. And that's when he kind of said that the war was unwinnable. He didn't just make up his mind there; he'd made up his mind earlier. But we were winning the war. The North Vietnamese got away from the feast table. Nixon went in there and ordered the bombing of Hanoi, and they went back to the table, peace table, going, "Let's talk peace." But they said from day one, "We don't care how many of our people you kill, we will outlast you."
Yeah.
And they basically knew, just like our enemy today knows that American resolve, instant gratification, will not hang in there long enough. People were not used to seeing body counts on TV.
Yeah.
That was the first time you could see how many Americans were killed today, and you don't see that today.
Well, it was probably the early birth of social media, like we know today. It's so persuasive. But I want to answer Hamdon's question for a minute too. Is you mentioned the politicians and you mentioned what happened in the war, but as we all know right now, all Vietnam documents are unclassified now. North Vietnamese, South Vietnamese, U.S. Everyone's reading everything now. And the more you read about the North Vietnamese and they're writing down documents, Nixon scared them to death. They thought he was going to make a left turn, Haiphong, Hanoi, and that was it. They were going to surrender any second. And all of a sudden, my favorite word, Watergate.
Yeah.
Watergate came in. Nixon's sail was full bloom. He was not going to lose that war. Watergate hit. The plumbers from Cuba with the duct tape. He got on the chopper and waved goodbye, and he waved goodbye to Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, the North Vietnamese today say they were ready to give up.
Oh yes,
with those the Christmas bombings he did, and then the war protesters came along and they just kind of folded up and he quit the bombing, and they said, well, we can go on a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's
documented.
amazing.
It is documented. That's exactly right.
Just the little things that with the war protests going on and the political things, it's like we've talked about before. The Cooper Chase Amendment basically sold out South Vietnam totally, the country and the people. South Vietnam had its problems. It had corruption problems. A lot of the officers were not officers. They were people who had some money, and their families bought them a position. They had no military training, and all of a sudden they were leading people out into combat. Well, they won't lead them out because they never left Saigon. And towards the end of the war, the president of Saigon, South Vietnam, basically pulled all the elite troops back to protect himself and kind of let South Vietnam go. But
there was also a very serious divide on religion with the Buddhist and the Catholic in Vietnam. We saw that spill over into the orphanages.
Well, that goes back to another thing we've talked about in the past. Kennedy was the first Catholic president we ever had.
The only one.
And the only one we've ever had. But and then all of a sudden, the South Vietnam, who was primarily Buddhist, had a Catholic leader.
That's
and,
right. That's right.
You wonder how that all came about. There's so many little nuances that kind of fall into one spot there.
As we approach May, as you mentioned before, this new interest in Vietnam, the students are much more aware of things. They're reading more. And I don't criticize the internet too much, but I do a little bit because of the urban legends. You can't believe everything you read, but you certainly can believe some of it.
Yeah.
Because some of these students are coming in, and we mentioned we're going to Green Hope tomorrow, and then Friday we're going to Mount Olive to speak at a school, North Duplin High School, which is the home of two Vietnam veterans that both were killed in Vietnam.
Of one family.
One family, the Hargrove Brothers. Now, that's Lane Hargrove.
Mm-hmm. He was killed in Vietnam.
Yes, he was.
And Joseph was killed later on Kong Tang Island
With
as a result. Yeah, you can tell them the name of the ship.
Mayaguez.
The
Mayaguez,
Mayaguez.
okay.
In fact, a side note, as we speak tonight, one of our guests here, Kerry Turner, is there right now. He's there finishing up some business, and hopefully when he comes back, we'll get him back on the show, and he'll wrap this thing up.
It's the anniversary of the event, and a lot of the Marines who landed on the island with Joseph are there with him.
Yes, they are. It's a great story. And he has, you talk about resolve, that man has resolve.
Yes.
Because his book is entitled Bringing Joseph Home. And that young man from Mount Olive, North Carolina, is bringing home his cousin.
Well, you know, that mother deserves everything that we could do. She's gone now, but she lost one son in Vietnam, and then she died with one son, not knowing anything about him whatsoever other than he was missing. And
That's worse.
Yeah. And
it is.
She died, you know, without the closure and so forth. And Carrie has promised her before she died that he would get something resolved. And we still think that Joseph is on a shelf in Hawaii. Now, this is not, we're going to be down there, but I think what, they're going to have a whole week or something on Vietnam or Vietnam commemoration.
What's happened is North Dublin High School, a teacher there named Hugh Martin, a social studies teacher, a history teacher, called me. He said, we're going to have an evening of Vietnam commemoration, projects, bulletin boards, things. Can you guys come down and do what's called a teach-in? And what I do, I call this the Vietnam experience. We're going to go in and talk to 150 students in the gymnasium. And we're going to tell them about Vietnam through our eyes. Take questions, take some memorabilia, give their teachers some challenges. Because some of the people, they're so well-intentioned. And you go and you start talking to people, and you see just a little tad of resentment when they say in their tone of voice, Bob Matthews, are you telling me how to teach? And I say, I am certainly, I would never do that. I'm telling you how not to. When you teach Vietnam, leave no stone unturned. If you don't know who Nick Rowe was, write it down and find out. If you don't know the impact of the Mayaguez, write it down and find out. Share it with your students. Don't be afraid as a teacher to say, I don't know. Yet. Go home that night, use your internet, and keep putting wood on that fire. Stoke the fire. And pretty soon, what's happened to all of us, we go into a classroom of 90 minutes. Bill Dixon will tell his background, Joe Harsh will tell his, and I will say, any questions? When the bell rings 90 minutes later, no one moves. The questions go forever.
Yeah. You know, but at the same time, Bob, we've done two things like the play Etchings in Stone we've done. And we've had two videos to go along with that.
Yeah.
And the students put those videos together. And what's been interesting to me is the students have gone back in and done research, but what they put together in those videos has always been the war protesters.
I know.
It's like that was the only story of Vietnam for a lot of the students today is the war protesters, the draft dodgers, and all that sort of stuff. And they were an important part of it. We just now recently Kent State was just a week or so ago.
May 4th.
May 4th.
May 4th, 1970.
But both times the students who put those videos together have primarily been war protesters and so forth. And it's like anything else, you've got to go in and do some research and read or watch one source, but you also got to go to other sources and read and watch those sources to get, and then somewhere in the middle usually is the truth.
Let me briefly talk about Kent State. May 4th, 1970, the anniversary, just last week, when the terrible thing happened at the college in Ohio, they have a reunion every year, commemoration, I should say. And the students are remembered, the four that were killed. And that famous picture of the young lady on the ground with her like this, calling for help for someone. Her name was Mary Lou Del Vecchio. And everybody thought that she was a student at Kent State. Ironically, she was a runaway from Florida. And she stopped at Kent State that day just by happenstance. Heard all the commotion, the partying, the demonstrations, got involved, became famous because of that photograph, and ironically, the police picked her up, took her back to her home, She grew up, of course, into a young woman, and every year goes back to Kent State on the commemoration and speaks to the crowd.
Bob, it's also unique. Today's technology has gone so far. Uh, there is documentation of a reporter there who actually had a pistol with him.
Yes.
They have gone back and recorded and listened and pulled out the sound of the first gunshot, and it was not one of the National Guard rifles. It was actually that pistol went off that started all the shooting. It's tragic for the students, but I also feel sorry for the young National Guard people who were there who were scared to death. They were surrounded.
There's a lot, like you said, when you pick up something like Kent State or Tet, and you just take the surface knowledge, you're doing yourself and your students a disservice. Dig deep, dig deep. Like you just said about the pistol, you start looking at Kent State. And last year, I happened to be privileged enough to teach a class at NC State, the encore class on Vietnam, and we were talking about the 10 hotspots of the Vietnam conflict. And some are bad, some are good, some are ugly. We talk about the draft, we talk about protest, talk about Kent. All of a sudden, this guy in class puts his hand up and he goes, "Could I have the floor?" And these are people over 45 years old. I said, "Sure, you can have the floor." "For what, sir?" He says, "I was at Kent State the day of the shooting." I said, "Get up here." He come up front, and we sat there. He went home that night. We met once a week. He brought back the newspapers from Kent in plastic, and he had us eating out of his hand. He was telling us the weather of the day, the climate, and Bill just mentioned most people were attracted by that. And Kent is not a small college. It's about maybe 15,000 students in Kent. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law went to Kent State. It's in Kent, Ohio. And ironically, there's so much to this. A very famous football coach now named Nick Saban at Alabama played football at Kent State. And May 4th, the day of the incident, Nick is walking to class and he sees the demonstration and says, "I think I'll go to lunch." He missed the whole thing, but he was there. He gave his perspective. It weighed on his mind. He said, when the interview on TV I was watching, he goes, "What if I'd have made a left and went down to the common area, right to the cafeteria? I was a football player. I had a free meal at the training table. I was 19 years old. I was going to eat lunch." We have our priorities, but history's like that.
Yeah. Now we're going to McGee's Crossroads for an all-day event.
That's our third.
Next week.
That's our third item on the menu. We're going to McGee's Crossroads, and we're going to speak to, we think, 200 students, ninth grade students on Vietnam, give them the inside story, and get them moving. And they want to take part of our course, because the course we built is modular, which means you can take a chapter out of it. You don't need the whole 18-week course. It was designed that way because with schools today, with electives and block scheduling, you can't expect schools to dedicate that much time to any part of subject, any part of history. So there's our first three. Then our fourth one is very interesting. The fourth one is a revisit. We're going to a school in Chapel Hill called the Woods Charter School, and we're going there for a specific reason. That entire student body of that school, a charter school is fairly small. They have 50 students per class. The entire junior class is reading one book on Vietnam. One book. They want us to talk about it. It's Tim O'Brien's famous book called The Things They Carried.
Yeah, that's the English class, too.
It is. Yes, it is. Yeah. And I was talking to some of the veterans and some of our guys that tuned into the show, and I said, now think about it for a minute. Tim O'Brien was not talking about your backpack in Vietnam, the things you carried physically, although he was. We all carried Sally packs, different kind of Alice packs on your back. You carried everything you needed to if you were a grad and traveled. But Mr. O'Brien was talking about the things you carried here and here. So I took a little survey on the phone before we go next week and asked 10 veterans, what did you carry? And what did you carry home? I got 10 different answers. I got anger. I got remorse. I've got guilt. You carry a lot of things. You carry joy. But that's going to be interesting because we've all read the book. 50 juniors read the book. We're going to have for 2 hours and discuss one book with one school on Vietnam.
If you're listening or watching this, do two things for me. Read the book, and I think you'll find it very interesting. It's kind of deep and psychological to a certain extent.
It is.
Which gave me some problems to start with, and I got into it. And but I would need you to call in at 919-518-9773, or even better, go into Computers 2K Voice on Skype, or log in on Nissan Communications or ncvi.org and list yourself with as a name, go to the chat, ask some questions and so forth. Bob and I and Anna were talking a few minutes ago about some shows we want to do. We want to do a show on how the vets were treated when they came home. Some of them were treated well, some of them were not treated so well. We want to do a show that I think it's going to be a really interesting show, is the news media.
Oh, yes.
And how they affected the war. Most of the news media people said they just reported, and as far as I'm concerned, they didn't report the war. They kind of created their own stuff for ratings to a certain extent. We want to talk about the music of the war. Now, that's pretty entertaining part. Some of the books about the war, some of the movies about the war. Again, we want to do a show of the things they carried, which will only work if y'all have read the book. We want to do one on nurses and donut dollies. We're not saying nurses and a donut dolly are the same, but they did, both of them did very important jobs in Vietnam. So we want to do a show on those. If you know someone who would fit in any of these categories, even if you're not a Vietnam vet, how about telling them, get in touch with us, ncvi.org. You can send us an email or go on to Facebook and send me a private message, and I'll get in touch with you. About some of the stories of how veterans were treated. If you know a donut dolly or a nurse, we're getting ready to do another symposium with the museum, which we'll be using. We need some nurses and donut dollies to work with. If you have a particular book that you think that's outstanding,
Sure.
that you'd like for us to talk about, let us know. The movies. There's some good movies out there about Vietnam, and there's some of the worst movies in the face of the earth out there about Vietnam. I know Bob and I saw the one that was the worst movie on the face of the earth.
Exactly.
I endured that movie for, it seemed like it was forever, but and quite often some of the movies out there kind of hit with the story, but we rewrite the story so much that it's almost like it's a different event. It's
it's funny that you say that, Bill, but I want to get back for just a moment to the literature on Vietnam, because there's so much out there, and one of my main complaints years ago was there was nothing there. I used to say, in fact, I said to the Wake County School Board when we applied to teach this course in Wake County schools, Bill McNeil was superintendent, and Bill said to me, Mr. Matthews, why do you want to teach this course? And I said, well, Bill, I just came back from Washington, D.C., and I have 58,000 reasons. He said, what do you mean? I said, the wall. I said, then I went back to Enlaw High School, where I teach, and I'm proud to teach there, sir. Picked up the U.S. history book and looked at the index and turned the V in the back. V. I saw Venezuela and vacuum cleaners. I threw the book in a wastebasket. Give me a chance. Tim O'Brien's book, The Things They Carried, has received the National Award of the best literature ever written on Vietnam. He's written 3 other books. He's written one, Looking for Cacciato, Fire in the Lake, Bring Me Home, Send Me Home in a Wooden Box, If I die in a combat zone, mail me home. He's a very funny, interesting man. But once you get past all the baloney, he's a heck of a writer. So put that on your bucket list, the things they carried. And as Bill mentioned before, there are so many things about Vietnam and stats that come up, and it's almost like an octopus. I thought 5 years ago, when I retired from teaching, the interest in Vietnam would retire with me. I could not have been more wrong. As Bill mentioned, there are so many people that want to talk about it but never had the venue. For instance, the owner of the San Antonio Spurs professional basketball team is a Vietnam veteran and a multi-billionaire. He's been to Vietnam with the same group we went with, Global Spectrum. He funds orphanages in Vietnam. We've tried to get him to help us. There's so many people that have an inside story that you need to hear. Now, some of you out there listening tonight may remember the restaurant chain of Ruth Chris famous steakhouses. Well, when Ruth Chris came to Cary a few years ago, her son, her name, she's passed away, by the way, rest her soul, her name was Ruth Fertel, Fertel. Her son was Randy Fertel, who I met at Texas Tech University. He was talking about a book he wrote on My Lai, and he was up on the stage and he was talking, and he was making no sense. So I put my hand up for a question, and he said, yes. I said, why don't you sit down? Because you're making a fool of yourself. He went over and sat down, and after the episode, he came over to see me, and he said, what's wrong? I said, Randy, what's wrong with you? You're talking about My Lai. You had the wrong province, and you had the wrong year. He goes, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm trying to learn more about Vietnam. I'm trying to write a course. I'm trying to teach it. I don't know all of it. I probably never will. I need to know more about My Lai. He writes a book on My Lai. He calls me, flies to Cary, helps me write a CD on Vietnam at SAS Institute. They opened a restaurant. It's a funny story. They opened a restaurant in Cary. Randy calls me and said, would you and your wife be our guest? It's black tie affair now. When Ruth Chris came in, they're staying at the Embassy Suites. So me and Betty, my wife, drive over to see Randy, and Ruth comes down. Ruth Fertel walks in the lobby. A handsome woman. She walks over and says, are you Bob Matthews? Yeah, she goes, thank you. You're the only guy that's ever told my son to shut up. I said, thank you, Ruth. She goes, enjoy the dinner. It's on us. I said, Vietnam, like I always say, Bill, it's like a river. It runs through you.
But while you've got the floor, there was a special event going on Mother's Day. Tell us about
Sure.
the new names and changes.
Sure. Every year on Mother's Day, the Vietnam Federation, the Vietnam Wall, adds names. Usually it's between 7 and 10 a year. Well, this year I was looking at it today. They made 14 changes on the wall last Sunday. And if you go on the wall and just type something like new names added to the wall, there's a video. It shows you the whole thing. Some were 20 years waiting. Some were 19. They've added 10 names to the wall. And some of you are aware of the wall, the way that the end of it are like my fingers. It's scattered like this. There's open areas at the end of each panel to possibly insert a name, which they do. Then after each name is a symbol. It could be a diamond. It could be a cross. And once they rectify the situation of the individual, they change the symbol. They close it in. They cross the X. They close out the diamond. They go from MIA to found. And from some are on there that were undetermined. Now it's determined. So 14 changes were made. And I do think they still said there's 75 errors on the wall. Misspellings. People's names are on the wall that are alive. They go up and say, that's my name, that's me. And they say, well, where's your DD 214? You say, it's right here. They said, that is you. But all we can do is say, we're sorry. It's now a conversation piece. We can't plug it in. It'll look too ugly on the wall. We can add. We can't detract. So can you live with that? We have to. They've made a lot of mistakes.
Well, if you look at it this way, hey, you were served in Vietnam and your name's on the wall, and hey, you're alive, celebrate that. But when you die, your name will be on the wall.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of guys that won't have that. So it's, as a Southern comedian used to say, it's all how you look at it and study it.
It is. It is.
And that's kind of the way I looked at burning crap so much was now. I didn't look at it that way during the war, but looks like now. I'm going to give you a couple of dates coming up for you to join us. On June 13th, the North Carolina State Capitol building will be celebrating their 175th year. And there will be all kinds of ceremonies and displays and so forth on the Capitol ground. Come down and join North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated. We'll be there. We will be there Memorial Day, which is this coming Monday, I believe.
25th, right?
25th, okay. We'll be there doing our ceremony there. June 5th, we'll be doing our, starting our 28th year of reading the names on that. And across the state, there's some other things going on. I just want to kind of, in random, give you some information about it. On May 21st, there's a veteran stand down at 10 a.m. in Red Springs Community Building in Red Springs, North Carolina,
Sure.
which I'm not quite certain where Red Springs is, but I think I've been there. On May 25th, a Memorial Day program at Veterans Park in Sampson County. On, let's see, May 16th, which we're getting close, the annual Triad Military Appreciation Day. It's free, and it's the Carolina Field of Honor in Kernersville, North Carolina. So if you live in that area, go join them on that. That sounds like a pretty good event there. They have a group, singers, Letters from Home. It's America's Bombshell Duo. It's a couple of girls who dress up as World War II periods and sing. That's pretty good. But that's in Kernersville, and it's free admission. Again, on May 25th, Memorial Day program in Mocksville, North Carolina. All kinds of different things going on. I'm getting this information from the North Carolina Full Vets magazine that comes out monthly. Let's see, May 14th, Armed Forces Day honoring Vietnam veterans specifically, and that's in Stewart Auditorium in Wannalluska, North Carolina.
Wow.
That's where Dirty Dancing was filmed.
Yeah, right, it is.
Let's see.
Swayze.
May 22nd, Memorial Day program in Marion, North Carolina, up in the mountains. May 24th, Memorial Day services, Alexander County Courthouse. May 25th, Memorial Day, time to honor America's heroes, Foothills Higher Education in Morganton, North Carolina. So there's all kinds of ways that you can get out there and meet some other veterans and so forth. So
I have a couple of announcements also, Bill.
all right, let's see. I got one more.
ahead.
Veterans
Go ahead.
Memorial Day ceremony in Wilson, North Carolina at Maplewood Cemetery. I can tell you that's going to be a good one. I went to my elementary school was right next door to Maplewood Cemetery when I was in school.
Been 7 years here in first grade.
My 7 years in the first grade. And we celebrated Confederate Memorial Day at that school.
I know you did.
And we used to. There's a lot of Confederate dead out there, and that's the Veteran Memorial Day ceremony at 5 p.m. On College Street, Wilson, North Carolina, right next to Margaret Herring High School or elementary school. Let's see, that is Kinston, May 30th is going to have a Memorial Day ceremony. And there's a few people that are actually having the ceremonies on Memorial Day.
I know
But this
they are.
one's on the 30th.
What the heck?
I don't know how we end up doing that and on that day, but that's kind of some dates coming up. Like I said, our normal ceremony, if you get a chance to go out there and celebrate and meet veterans, that's the day we honor veterans and their day. And you got a couple of dates there before we run out of time real quick.
I have a couple of comments to make about what's coming up. And most of you that watch the show or know us, know NCVVI and what we do, you're aware that we have gone back to Vietnam several times. And we are going again. And because this is very different this time, because we are going to sponsor a teach-in in Vietnam. And we're going to take the Wake County schools. And you may be aware of this, I'm not sure though, but I want to make you aware of it. That Wake County School Wake County Schools, through the USA Today newspaper, has been called the top school system, the top school system for teaching Vietnam in America. So what we'd like to do through Global Spectrum in D.C. and through our friends in Saigon is to teach Vietnam to our teachers, but teach them Vietnam in Vietnam. We're going to go to each school. For instance, Millbrook High School, Enloe High School. You've got so-and-so. Let's say Bill Dixon is your Vietnam teacher. We'd like you to sponsor this young man with us on this teach-in Vietnam. Now, teachers today need 10 credit hours to get recertified in their field. Workshops, different things they take. This will cover all of that. You'll recertify your teacher. You'll encourage your curriculum. You'll make your teachers more bona fide. We will chaperone it as veterans. Global Spectrum will plan it. We will take the teachers to Vietnam with veterans. The conversation on the trip over, 26 hours, Bill's favorite flight, will be talking to the teachers, getting them in this new world they're going in. When they come back, they'll be the better teachers than ever. This is going to be sponsored by Wake County Schools and NCVVI. We have a name for it. We always call it To Teach a Nation. We're going to teach a nation. We're going to take the teachers if they want to go. I know it's a challenge. I know it's difficult. Years ago, I took 4 teachers to Vietnam with me. And we looked around for a while there and came back, and it worked. So we're going to redo this again. Our plan is late next summer or late next fall, if the schools will cooperate. It's a fundraiser, of course. I mentioned before the San Antonio Spurs. I have a letter off to the owner, hoping he'll bankroll the whole thing and go with us. He's a Vietnam vet, Silver Star, Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts, Mr. Holt.
Bob, if we're going to do that, can we take the teachers to the Chinese water torture show? Chinese water show?
That's
or
a
the Vietnamese?
must. That's a must. They must sit in the front row.
All right.
And
And maybe we can even give them a chance to sit down with the ambassador.
No, and I'm not going. Now, the thing about it is this. We have gone throughout this state and offered lessons of Vietnam. This show has been a tremendous help for people coming up and saying, I just read about it. You guys went back to Nam. Vietnam veterans always call Vietnam Nam. Went back to Nam and did a playground at an orphanage. Man, I wish I'd have went. So I just go like this. Here, write your name down. Write your name down. We'll be back in touch. One guy said, I'm not going to go, but can I give you some money to help you go? It's like a river. Just keeps rolling along.
Now, see, in the north, they are Vietnam veterans call it the Nam.
The Nam.
Down here in the south, it's Nam.
Yeah,
Y'all
that's
been
true.
to Vietnam?
Yeah, that's true. You know, when Bill mentioned before, the future shows look like so interesting because you're talking about stuff we love. We're talking about the music of the 60s. When we start playing the music, you'll be tapping on the table. We got to get out of this place. All of these songs, war, what is it good for? All these things, the movies. And as much as people say, all you guys, but think for a minute.
Be the first to bring your son home in a body bag?
That's right. Even though people say Rambo wasn't good for Vietnam, you dissect, like Bill mentioned, movies. Take a little clip, a snippet of a movie. Take a snippet of Forrest Gump, of Good Morning Vietnam. Take Rambo when he was in the police station, out of control. And Lieutenant Little Luke said to him, what do you want? And he says, what we all want. We love our country. We gave our lives in a year of our lives. We want you to say thank you. Once, we want you to say thank you. That's what we all want. And we do it again. So, watch your movies. You're going to hear more about them. I think we're on fire.
Talk to your Vietnam vet friends, nurses, donut dollies, people who have stories about coming home, whether we're good or bad. Let us know. If you read a good book, let's talk about it on the air. I think Del Vecchio's book, The 13th Valley, was one of the best books I've read.
Very good. Very good.
And of course, Nick's book, 5 Years of Freedom. We might can get his son to come on and talk about his dad's book.
That would be
sometime.
interesting.
He's over in Johnson County.
Yes, he is. Benson.
Of
Cali
course,
Crow.
Kerry's coming back from Cambodia pretty soon. He's already promised he'd be on the show. So there's lots of opportunities
Sure.
out there for more information. We just want to know which way you want us to go. Hopefully we don't have too many shows we have to fill in like tonight. We will try to resolve our, actually Amnon will try to resolve our technical difficulties, because Bob and I can't hardly turn the computer on, let alone solve those problems.
You know you can. I can't.
And so thank you again for tonight, for tuning in on our show, and we look forward to seeing you next time with the POW Re-Education Camp Symposium that was full house, highly acclaimed at the North Carolina Museum of History. And we'll look forward to seeing you at some of the events that we're doing here in town, like the POW MIA ceremony. Come join us for any of them. Just let us know. Come up and tell us that you saw the show. Go out and tell both of your friends that you saw the show, and tell them how to find it, and so forth. So you will have more people looking at it. That's the whole idea of using up our time, is to
Sure.
reach out and touch more people and tell the Vietnam story.
And if you're a Vietnam veteran listening, whether you're a member of our group or not, this is something I want to encourage you to do. Your kids, your grandkids, all have a base school, a high school. Get involved in your schools. Call the school, get a hold of the head of the social studies, even the principal, and say, hey, I live in town, pay taxes here. My name is so-and-so. I'd like to come in and talk to the kids, share my experiences with them. Teachers love this. They love assets like this in the community. And for so many years, we avoided the asset of the veterans. Let's mine this, get these guys in. The Afghanistan veterans are coming home. Use these young men and women. Bring them in. They're a tremendous source of knowledge.
You know, Bob, along those same lines, you will be amazed at how healing it is to you if you're a Vietnam vet by going in and speaking to the class. And I can tell you, if you don't go in and tell the real story, some wannabe is going to do it for you. When you go into a class and they ask you how many you killed in skin or how many you ate when you were in Vietnam, you realize that the wannabe's been there before you. So it's either you going in and telling the real story and feeling better about your time in Vietnam, or some wannabe who wears Air Force medal, Marine medals, and Army medals on the same uniform, going to go in and tell their version of the story. So that's your choice, whether you want the real story or the wannabe story.
Sure. Good point. Good point.
And I think we've about run out of time.
Well,
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. Our weekly lineup of call-in programs includes Computers 2K Now with Amnon Nissan, Health In with Debbie Bruck, Breaking Free with Marilyn Shannon, Lessons of Vietnam with NCVVI members, The Tanya Love Show, Your Healthy Pet with Gisela DiCarlo. And if you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it at www.nissancommunications.com. Sponsored by Atomus.com, makers of quality video recorders and converters for professionals, CarolinaApparel.com, and DeltaForce.net.